And yeah, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. If they're specific, then Martha's going to go into a little bit more detail as well. Okay.
Sorry, just ask, well, it's just about the urban development company.
That's what Future Places is. So Future Places, for those that don't know, is we've set up our own urban development wing of the council. It's technically a company, but it's fully owned by the council. And it's the way that we are able to attract the talent and basically, rather than having a few council officers leading on regeneration, we've created a whole company to lead on regeneration, fully owned by the council. And they're the ones that are working with the Towns Fund Board to do that bigger section of Phase 2.
Are they doing other things as well?
Yeah, so they're doing all of our regen plans. So overall, across the whole BCP region, we've got about £3 billion worth of regen opportunities. Because, like I said, we've got the old power station site in Poole, which is the largest brownfield site in the whole of the south coast. Wessex Fields, we've got Bick and Winter Gardens and everything in Bournemouth, as well as Boscombe. So lots to do, but that's why we figured that we needed the talent and the money to be able to do it. Sue.
Good evening. Councillor Broadhead, when we came in, we had to take our temperature to make sure we weren't overheating. You know what I'm going to say next? The earth is overheating. The regeneration we need is the world of nature that is dying, and we're not being told about it or informed on how to do this. We need fruit trees, nut trees, herbal medicines. We've got 30 to 40 years, according to Michael Gove 5 years ago, to stop soil infertility. We don't want our grandchildren to starve. We know this is coming, but we're not being told it. Please, can you put something in about regeneration of our natural world? Because insectageddon, incinerating everything, wildfires, the oceans are overheating, we're in a big mess. You know the coastlines are disintegrating, and we still haven't got any wind farm. We're still scrabbling around without the energy we need. Please, can we have regeneration of the world of nature, which we are killing? It's World War III on nature. So that's what we need, and we don't see it in BCP. You just said no to the fossil fuel proliferation, for goodness sake. It's just mad.
Can I sort of add a question on to that?
Sure.
And say, because you have planning as part of your portfolio, don't you?
Planning policy, yeah.
Yeah.
We're putting together a new local plan later this year.
Is, following on from Sue, is there a sort of push within the planning and all these new builds that you're talking about, redevelopments, etc., for eco building, self-sufficient buildings and such like?
Yeah.
Because that seems to me to be a very valid thing for the council to be involved in.
So a couple of real examples in Boscombe. So first of all, you look at the Phase 1 plans that we're doing around the kind of Hawkwood Road end of the Boscombe regeneration. And we're not just talking about high-rise buildings, we're talking about parks, we're talking about that kind of whole reconnecting with nature. Because the opportunity that we have, we are not developers. The council's not developers, the Towns Fund Board isn't developers. We're not about making money, we're about creating the best place possible. And we've been really clear as a board that the regeneration that we want to see in Boscombe is a green regeneration. So I think that's one part. On the wider part of the policy, because while you've got me here, that we talk about the climate emergency. It's a climate and ecological emergency. So I've just taken a paper through. We're going to be the very first council in the whole country to embed biodiversity net gain into every development. I'm going to bring that forward in the next 6 months. What that means is that any new development that comes forward, this is actually government policy, but they've given 2 years to put it in, and we're going early. Anything you build, whether it's in an urban area or in the middle of the countryside, anything in BCP that you build will have to see an increase in biodiversity by 10% the last 30 years. That's quite a challenge, actually. It means that if you've got a patch, a beautiful area that you want to build in, you've got to make it even more biodiverse. And if you've got a really urban area, you've got to add biodiversity in. So that's something we can do immediately. The big way that we're going to fix it all is that later on this year we'll be creating our new local plan for the area. That is the big document, which is the policy document. Every area has to have one, which lasts for 20 odd years. This will be the BCP's first one. And this is the opportunity we've got to say, right, if we want to take climate seriously, we need to make sure that planning policy is reflected it. We need to make sure that we are creating new parks and new nature parks, not getting rid of them. We need to protect our green belt if possible, but actually where we can, open it up so that people can experience nature. and make sure that the new planning policies that are coming through are embedded directly in the local plan. Got a bit of work to do that. We start work on that later on this year. In the meantime, the tools that we've got is as a board for the Towns Fund in Boscombe means that we can start putting it into action. And Martha can then answer more directly, but the plans that we've seen already, have
So
that right at the heart of
in
it.
general terms, can we look forward to seeing new build houses having to have solar panels, for example? Can we have green roofs on bus shelters like they do?
Well,
these are all
the-
small
just
things.
the very,
but they're
yeah.
really good, and they're very good encouragements for
Yeah.
other.
And you can encourage it, or you can change planning policy to do it, and
Yeah.
that's what the local plan will do. And the biodiversity will do a lot of that anyway, because if you think about some of the urban sites, if you're saying that you have to have 10% increase in biodiversity, you're going to have to start talking about green roofs and hedgehog hotels and things like that. So that is coming in, really shortly. The big opportunity is the local plan that we'll be doing later on this year. We're currently in the middle, if you don't know, of a something called the Issues and Options consultation at the moment. That runs for another 4 weeks. That's just a very high level. We're going to do the local plan. Here's 10 key areas. Give you your steer. So it's quite loose, but we've done that deliberately to say we're not telling you what we think we should do. We want to hear, and it's got a big climate section on that. What we've also done in that is that every single site, as part of the local plan process, developers by law are able to promote sites to the council for consideration. We've taken the decision that every site that's been presented to us by developers is in that document. Most of them are terrible and would never happen, but rather than pick the ones that we don't like, we said we'll put them out there, get public feedback now, so that when we do that local plan later in the year, we can do it having had the steer from people, and also to make sure that there's climate and all the other things, affordable homes, everything. That's our opportunity to nail it. In the meantime, we've got £20 million from government. We're putting our money where our mouth is as a council. We're working with the community, and we can start doing that regeneration of Boscombe. Well, it's already happening.
Any other questions?
Yeah, can you explain in simple language biodiversity?
I'll try. I've got two kind of glaring at me, so if I forget this wrong. But yes, essentially, biodiversity is about nature and the environment. So when the danger you have when you develop is that you make that biodiversity worse. You can instead of a diverse ecosystem, you can get rid of it, particularly if you're in really ecologically sensitive areas, but also in urban areas. The government have just brought through in their environment bill that was passed in November, they're putting it into law that any development that comes forward, instead of making nature worse, you've got to make nature better. That's a kind of a simple...
How is that going to be implemented in certain places, which I could tell you, but it's in Southbourne, they're taking away nature and putting flats up.
So what they'll have to do is you'll have to find a way around it. So if you are building in an urban area, so let's say you are building on an old car park, well, the biodiversity isn't very good there anyway, so you're going to have to put some biodiversity in. If you're building in an area which is really, really ecologically sensitive, you're going to have to do an awful lot of work to increase the biodiversity in that vicinity. So it's a big challenge. It's actually the danger with it is that we are short of homes in this area. We have an affordability crisis for young people. You resolve that by building homes. So the danger is it could. Sorry?
Where I'm talking about, they're not going to be affordable homes.
Yeah, and so this will be anything. So the biodiversity will be any site that comes forward once we pass this. Will have to, and then of course anything has to get planning permission anyway. So it has to comply with the policy of an area.
Tell me, when planning permission is, the silly little notice that is put up with a piece of paper on a thing, so if it gets wet, it rains or it blows away. Why they don't put it in a plastic folder, I don't know, but. That's common sense, but of course that doesn't apply these days. How many objections do you have for it to be turned down?
Well, objections don't make something turned down. Anything that is particularly contentious goes to the planning committee, and then the planning committee is the one that makes a decision. And of course, the difficulty is as well is that the planning committee has to consider something based on, I don't sit on the planning committee, but it has to look at whether it's policy compliant or not.
Policy
So you can have a development of 5 houses, and you might not like them, but if the planning policy says that that's allowable, then you have to be, obviously that's what the planning committee is there to do, to interpret the planning policy.
Where would I get hold of this planning policy?
Well, so in Bournemouth, there's already the current Bournemouth local. So at the moment, there's current local plans, albeit a bit out of date for Bournemouth, for Port of Christchurch, depending on where you live. So the planning policies are within the actual local plan, the existing local plan that exists for the area, and that says in an area. So if you're in a conservation area, for instance, it's even more restricted in terms of what you can or cannot build, as Julie from AEC knows well. But other than that, if you want to put employment, it has to be in the area that's identified as an employment zone. That's all in the Bournemouth plan.
You started saying about policy comp, and I didn't get the rest of it.
The local plan. So it's called the local plan. So at the moment,
Where can it be accessed, I think?
if you go onto the BCP Council website and go to the planning section, you can look under the planning policies. Jane may know better, but it'll be under the planning policies.
You should be able to get it in the
And
library.
it will be at the library as well. And that will tell you, so every 5-6 years,
To the town hall and ask them to send me one.
it will be in the library. The easiest probably pop to the library.
I like things to read.
Yes, no, there'll be physical copies in the library.
There's physical
Yeah.
copies.
And that will say, if you are on, so you'll be able to look and go, if you are on, Jones Road, it's not planning policy to put 10-storey block of flats, for instance. Whereas if you're in the Lansdowne, that's a tall building zone, you can go higher. That's the kind of planning policy.
I think if, say, Boscombe or any library doesn't actually have one, they'll know how to get hold of one.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they've got them anyway. Sorry, I've got Julie with your hand up.
A few things. I've got a hard copy at home, so
Oh, there you go.
if you can't find one in the library, then come back to the University College and ask for me at reception. I'm Julie Curran, and I've got one at home because I'm probably interested in planning. There's also a national planning policy framework, which is the national fundaments of planning, and in this community you're very lucky that you've got the Boscombe Community neighbourhood plan, which was hard fought for and sets the very local neighbourhood plans.
And that's another layer on top of the local plan, and that's actually more modern than the local plan. So anything in the Boscombe and Folkestone neighbourhood plan area has to also comply with that neighbourhood plan that's been put in place as well. The big prize that we've got, and this is where it's really important, is those are all getting a little bit out of date now, and we have to, by law, do a new local plan. We'll be doing that later on this year, and there's a consultation that's underway at the moment on some of the issues to say, give us your steer on what you think the type of thing are really important. That's just a first high-level consultation.
Why are the plans out of date then?
Sorry?
Why are the plans out of
Because
date?
what we thought 5 years ago would be relevant isn't
Oh, so
probably
they're
relevant
5
now.
years old.
So every 4 or 5 years you come up with a new local plan for the area to reflect the fact that 5 years ago we were probably saying that
No, the point I'm making is you paid people 5 years ago to make these plans, and they're still sitting there. So all that's
Policies,
a waste
they're the
of
policies.
time and money.
Yeah, so every 5 years you take a long hard look at your area, and this is government legislation, and you go, right, what are those planning policies still relevant? Do we still want an employment zone over there, or actually as time moved on, people don't want that employment, that's more relevant for housing or vice versa. So you do that as a regular cycle, every area does that. And then on top of that, as Martha has said, if you've got an area that's got a neighbourhood plan, then you have that opportunity to get a hyper-local level of what you want to have in an area as well. So there's lots of ways to get involved, but like I say, later on this year, we'll be looking at all the planning policy and going, right, what does the future, where do we want our affordable areas to be, where do we want our employment zones to be, how do we want people to drive more or cycle more, do we want to open up the green belt for affordable homes, or do we want to protect it at all costs? They're all the choices that we've got to make for planning policy. It's not an easy job. I wouldn't want to do it.
Well, you don't always listen to the public anyway. So,
Are there any other questions for Councillor Broadbent?
I was just going to offer a practical example on the biodiversity point in terms of I'm Chief Operating Officer here at ASCC University College, and people hopefully are aware that we've got a development in progress, which is to build our integrated rehabilitation centre on the opposite side of the road. When we successfully apply for planning permission, that's on the basis of that getting BREEAM very good rating, which is around the environmental sustainability criteria, how energy efficient it is. The building will have green roof, it will have the maximum solar panelling, so we've kind of gone back in terms of what we applied for, and partly motivated by future energy costs, but making sure that's maximum. We'll have bird boxes, bat boxes. We took down 5 trees, and we'll make sure that we replant at least 12 that will be native trees. And then also on this campus, we're really fortunate that we've got an area of quite extensive bluebell woodland that is substantially tree protection, TPO protected trees, but really is a great environment that kind of backs onto Woodland Walk for doing that. So we've looked at the biodiversity of that in terms of what's native species, animals and vegetation, and what we might want to do to encourage things, how we might plant different things that open up different species, just to try and really think. We had a good study done a few years ago by the Woodland Trust that looks at exactly those sorts of things.
Sounds like you'll be a torchbearer for the whole of BCP. That's excellent.
I think it's what any public organisation just has to do as a minimum, just in terms of expectations, not because we have to do it, but because it's the right thing to do. And
we've got the technology to be able to do it now as well, don't we? But this is what excites me. Final point for me on the Boscombe regen. If you walk through the centre of Boscombe at the moment, it's not exactly green, is it? You know, it doesn't shout to you that there's an area that you want to hang out in and dwell and feel like one with nature. You know, if we can land this properly, which we're able to do, and we will own, you know, a big chunk of it together, we can then plan. We can put parks back in. We can create a garden square with, you know, with greenery. We can build buildings with green roofs. We've got the opportunity now to do it. And we don't have to rely on anybody else. That's a nice thing. Because previously, if you know, without that 20 million from the government and without the, you know, the Future Places team and the Towns Fund board, the only way that we would be able to ensure that happened would be to change planning policy to mean that any, you know, Mr. Big Boy developer that came on, because they had to comply to policy, had to do it. And that's one tool, but it's much better if you can do it yourself. So we've got a really big opportunity, and I think it's quite exciting. But, you know, I would. Final point, feed into that options and issues consultation that's going on at the moment. You can go onto the BCP website under the Have Your Say section. It's very high level. It's 10 areas that are kind of important, to do with housing, to do with climate, to do with employment zones, just to give us some early feedback, because the more feedback we get from people to say, actually, it's really, for instance, it's really, really important that the next generation have jobs. You know, there aren't enough jobs, and we want this type of job, and we want it here. That helps us to shape how we're going to create that plan for the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Broadhead. We're going to now go on to a presentation by Martha Cavell about the Towns Fund that was briefly mentioned by Councillor Broadhead. I think maybe in the future we can maybe get someone from planning to come down and explain a bit more about planning, and maybe we can actually help you facilitate some sort of conversation about the formation of the local plan, get local people to feed into that in the future. So maybe the next meeting, we're going to be doing public meeting every 3 months. So here's Martha Cavell, she's going to be talking about the Boscombe Towns Fund. Thank you very much.
Just giving you a brief update of what's going on and what the board really considered at the last meeting. I realise I'm standing in front of the screen. Is that all right? Yeah. Right, okay. So I wanted to just update you on a few things that we're going to be consulting people on in March and April time, and just give you a bit of a preview. So we've got lots of speakers tonight, so this really is just an update to show you what's coming, rather than having a massive discussion about it, because we want to take comments in a structured way later on. We've been busy working on our local transport improvement projects, and included in the town investment plan that we got money for. We've got 6 projects that we're now designing, which includes improvements outside Folkestone Station, improvements along between Folkestone Station to the precinct, that's number 2 on the plan, bus improvements station, looking at the station, and looking at a new link between Folkestone Station and the pier as well. That'll be a new bus route, so talking to bus companies about that. We're improving cycling and walking along the Ashley Road, that very narrow pavement along there, which is really dangerous, especially outside the school. And then Woodland Walk, looking at how we can improve that, making that more of a natural trail. Obviously the trees down there are really important, but to make it actually a bit more open and safer at night time as well. And then some other sort of local cycle improvements like storage and much more secure cycle storage as well. We've also been commissioning as part of that a parking strategy, looking at how many parking spaces we should be providing for the new development that's coming forward, and looking at sort of other things that we need to provide, like cycle spaces, spaces for motorcycles, and that kind of thing. We've been looking at, you know, what we're going to do with Car Club to encourage that. We've got a lot of illegal parking on the streets, as in particular around Boscombe, that area. They're very overparked, those streets. So looking very much at sort of trying to get more car clubs in, which are really good for reducing car ownership, especially people who've got 2 cars. Often they can go down to 1 car and then use a car club sometimes as well. So we think there's lots of potential in the area for that, and working with Co-Wheels on that. Feral parking is a key part of the strategy, and it's great to hear the debate and the support now for reducing climate change, and obviously reducing you know, car use and, you know, using bikes more is really, really critical to that as well. We want to, we've been looking very much at on-street parking and managing that a lot better, and tackling non-compliant parking and inconsiderate parking, because I know it's a hot topic. Something we've started to really get into is we've done some very detailed parking surveys over weekdays, night time, weekends, and we're looking at the potential reduction in number of car parking spaces in the centre of Boscombe. We've got 1,100 spaces at the moment, and only up to half of those are ever used at any one time. So we've got a huge amount of capacity there that we can use that space a lot better for. So, and that provides the opportunity for all the stuff that we want to do with the town's fund. We're looking at using Kings Park a lot better, a lot more effectively. There was obviously the park and rides over the summer there, and we really want to use that sort of in the long term as overflow parking for beach parking and big events as well. And if we can improve that link and walkway from Kings Park down to the centre, we think there's real potential to use that as well. Bit of a whistle-stop tour this, but Phil gave so much information I could just sort of go through it quickly. So yeah, we've been talking to people on the master plan. It goes through lots of phases of design, and had lots of input from Mog and Harry in particular, and various people in the room. You're very familiar with some of the proposals now, and this is for phase 1. And this is just a summary really of the comments that we got back from you guys back in December, talking to the forum, talking to the neighbourhood plan group, the village hall group, South Coast Medical Practice, and the master plan working group as well, which includes representatives of the community. Parking, the biggest issue. You know, people want, they're quite passionate about keeping as much car parking as possible, especially on Hawkwood Road. It's seen as a really important car park for the town centre in the evening in particular, so wanted us to maximise that. But also, you know, concerns about the park, didn't want it to be too large, management and issues potentially attracting antisocial behaviour, and the need really to design out crime is a real key point as well. But family homes are obviously a real priority for the community, and providing that good quality village hall and community centre. So the designs for phase 1 have developed. I showed you them in November time. These have developed a bit more. This is Christchurch Road and the entrance to the Sovereign Centre, and at the moment we're looking at an expanded walkway across where the WH Smith building is, possibly, and this is only an option, I have to say, and this would be the community centre on the Cafe Nero car park, Costa car park at the moment. So that parking would be replaced with the community centre. And then retaining more parking in response to the consultation that we had, and to have it at this end of the road so it can be closer to the beach, but providing about 80 new homes in there and a park and open space, which is really critical. The link from the high street to the rest of the neighbourhood is really critical for improving accessibility and walking and cycling and encouraging that. And we also want to have some retail kiosks as well on that walkway. So I've just got a couple more slides really on the community centre. Just wanted to this lead into what Richard's going to talk about in a minute. Been looking at what's the best size and form for the community centre, and we've looked at the Henry Brown in West Howe. Don't know if any of you looked at that, but looking at the size of that, it's about 630 square metres. It's got a lovely hall, it's got a great cafe, it's got a meeting space as well. So it's really great space, and it is well used as well. It's quite an old centre, but it's been renovated recently, and yes, it's really important part of the community. Much smaller is the Howcroft Community Centre. That's about 400 square metres, and that's really just got, as shown on the plan here, it's got the main hall that you can divide with some doors, and then a couple of changing rooms and things like that. So that's the kind of format that we've been looking at with Richard and the group, and looking forward to develop that a little bit more this year. So engagement this year, we're going to be doing opening the management office for 3 days a week from the middle of the year, and that is going to be for people to pop in any time to get information on Towns Fund. The Towns Fund is 10 projects, and really we focus a lot of our discussions on the physical building at the moment, but there are lots of other stuff going on, and really, it's important that the projects benefit everybody, and this is really the start of that, and it's a really exciting time this year because we're seeing some of the projects starting and being implemented. But we've got a more specific exhibition we'll be putting up in April and May, which will be the plans for phase 1, and we'll have an online questionnaire which is linked to that, physical questionnaire you can fill out as well, be much more detail about what I've just shown you this evening. So that's a bit of a preview really of what we're going to be showing you in April.
And where is the office?
So it is in the old Cafe Nero. That's where we are now. Adrian and I sit there and meet people and do our work and things, and it's an amazing space. So we've got our offices in the back, and then in the front we've got a really big area and a big table for us to have meetings of about 15 people. So and as well some sort of more informal space as well.
What days a week will that be?
We're going to be open Tuesday to Thursday, probably for about 4 to 6 hours a day. But so it should be make it much more accessible, and people be able to pop in and talk to us about plans.
Will you have copies of the plans there?
Yeah, we will do. So we won't be all just relying on online as we are at the moment. So
And will that space be available to anyone outside those hours, like a community group such as ourselves?
Anything connected with the
Meetings.
Towns Fund, definitely. Yeah. That at the moment we're not, sure how the space will run, so we take it as it comes. So
But there's the
absolutely.
potential.
Definitely. There's not quite enough space to have this number of people, but definitely for sort of groups of 15, 20, that kind of thing. Yeah, so it'd be lovely to have you all, and I think it's a great space for us to see how the community centre will work, and just start to sort of develop the connections and groups and that. So that's all I wanted to say.
Has anyone got any questions for Martha? I forgot to say that, of course, Martha's there on the Towns Fund board, or will you're
Well, I'm the programme manager
technically
for the
you
town,
don't
so
have
I'm
a
an
vote,
officer.
but you
That's right.
you
I steer you
you
in a strong way.
give us all the information. Yes.
You're like herding cats.
And Zoe Tees for the record. You talked about Kings Park, the park and ride
Yes.
area. Are there going to be toilets there? Because I keep going on about there's no toilet facilities
right.
in Kings
Yeah.
Park at all. And if you've got
Okay.
people parking and riding,
Yeah.
I can imagine families with children that have just got back to their car are going to be
Yeah.
doing what I like to call a wild wee.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot
I
in Kings
didn't know
Park.
that.
There's
That's-
about 10 schools all around Kings Park. and there was a big consultation about 5 years ago where they had over 1,000 people really in favour of the toilet, and then there was no money for the toilet.
Right, okay.
But there was 452,000 spent on the athletic stadium.
Oh my gosh,
But
yeah.
you can't have
yeah.
access to the toilet there.
Yeah.
You need a membership.
That was probably in the phases that when all the toilets were closing and things like that.
Well, there just
Yeah.
isn't a toilet
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, obviously, yeah, thanks for giving us
Because
that
I'm often
comment.
there with a
so-
toilet and a pensioner, and between the two of them, I don't know who's
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
have an accident. That
Yeah,
was-
that's
And
really
also-
tricky. Yeah,
also
yeah.
on-
Good
on-
point. I mean, it's really important when you're doing park and ride, isn't it? that
And
you-
also on the park and ride, as well as being for people parking who don't live in the area,
Mm.
it would be good if it's available for those of us who do live in the area.
Mm.
And because there is no bus service to
So
the,
would you want it on the main road or in
Well,
the
you
car
kind of
park?
need two. You need one near the
no,
park
there
and
should be
ride,
some sort of
one near the
courtesy
playground.
stop you can hail it at.
Mm.
There definitely needs to be one near the playground.
Okay.
There's about 4 schools, 5-minute
Yeah.
walking distance.
Yeah, yeah.
Because all the children just go to an area where there's woods, and you all know what they're doing in there. I'm back in a minute, you know, going to the
Yeah,
wood.
yeah, yeah.
And then there's the area that's
So
where
I
the
know
park
that
and
the
ride
Parks
is.
Department are doing the master plan for
Yeah,
King's
sure.
Park.
I've contacted them,
Yeah.
and every time they say, oh, it's somebody else in a different
Right,
department, and
okay.
then somebody
Yeah.
else gets given the buck of me,
Okay.
and they just find a different way to
Yeah, yeah.
creatively fob me off.
Right,
So
okay.
I'd really like 2 separate toilets in
Yeah.
2 different areas, the
Okay.
park and ride and the playground.
That's a really good comment and feedback, so I'll
I
feed
don't know
that
if,
back to...
Pete, is Peter here? Yes. Would that fall under your remit at all? No. Okay.
This is what I have. It doesn't fall under anyone's remit, apparently. They just send them around to me.
Yeah, yeah. No, well, no, it's good. It's a good comment, and yeah, definitely
Martha,
take that. Yeah.
Could I could talk to the portfolio holder whose portfolio covers public toilets,
Oh, perfect.
whose name I probably won't mention now, because it might be overwhelmed.
Thanks.
So I'll talk to him and see what he knows about whether there can ever be toilets in,
Yeah, I know
Thank you.
Churchill Gardens just had a really good, it's public toilets, but they've also got like a room that they can do environmental talks on and classes with children.
you
And
mean the new Aspire building?
I think so, yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
it's called. But
Yeah.
replicate that, it's already, you know, the plans are already there.
European.
We got
Money.
$750,000 from the EU.
So I think it was
for that. I don't know who it
£20,000
was.
it cost to
Pardon?
build that. I think it was £20,000 that cost to build. So you
What,
could
the
just
new Aspire
replicate.
building? No, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was it more?
Yeah.
Oh,
But
okay,
anyway,
maybe the
that's
original
what you
plan.
mean.
But if you could just replicate that plan and just put it twice
Well,
in King's
But it
Park.
may be that we can, now that we control the bowling club building,
Yes.
that we can actually open those up for the
Now that-
public.
That would be
Because
nice.
that building is open in the daytime and the
Yeah.
evenings, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not that you're in
But
the
also
park
the
in the evenings,
playground,
but anyway.
because the bowling place is about a 20-minute walk from the playground, and
Yeah.
I can tell you my toddler.
Yeah,
You've
yeah.
got, yeah.
No.
Well, I have to carry her, or I'll be
You're
running.
talking
Yeah.
about the lovely big new, the woodeny playground, aren't you?
I'm
One
talking about
with
Nick,
zip
you
line.
know King's Park Nursery. The
Oh, that one.
That
Oh,
e-
okay,
that
by the
end.
little roundabout.
yes,
Yes, I
And
know.
there's a car park there.
Yes.
So people
there is.
park
Yeah.
and get their dogs out, and they go for a dog walk.
Yeah.
But there's no
No toilet.
hand washing facilities,
No,
toilets.
no.
You know, my daughter
Okay.
put her hand in poo,
Let
she
me
didn't know
look
how to
into
wash
it.
her hands. It was, you know,
Okay, I'll look into it, and then Mark,
you.
I can get back to you and you
Yeah,
can post
great.
it.
that would be great.
Thank
you.
you. Councillor Farquhar, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think I'm glad that you're taking that on board, Martha. I think it raises, you know,
I wouldn't say I'm taking it on board, but I will
it-
certainly
it
work with James.
raises,
to-
it raises perhaps
to
a
raise-
challenge
Yeah.
for the different departments, because we're talking about waste, we're talking about parks, we're talking about environment, we're talking about where it's coastal, we're talking about this and so on and so forth. So I don't think there is a easy route through for a resident to identify,
I mean-
or even a group of residents.
We've been talking actually the last couple of days about a lot of issues in Boscombe, particularly the High Street, you know, where a joined up approach is needed and is lacking for various reasons. And we used to have the Boscombe Regeneration Partnership Board, and you know the Townsville Board are now very keen to sort of have that sort of joined up thinking again. And I think hopefully now we're out of COVID and we can have more joint meetings. You know, that's the kind of project where, you know, different departments have to get together and talk about it, don't they? So yeah.
If I may, the question which I actually had was to with Councillor Broadhead, who's got off to his next meeting. is that you mentioned something about this time next year. I didn't understand, or I missed what the phrase that was referring to. Are we talking about work starting in phase one?
Yeah,
or?
he was saying that, you know, things will be more visible this time next year, and I think, you know, certainly, you know, as I said, we have got projects that will be starting to, they've already started, as Adrian will tell you in a minute, you know, they will pick up momentum, you know. So, yeah. Okay.
This lady over here.
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask just my own curiosity, would it not be more cost effective to revamp the old buildings into our community centres rather than building a whole new one?
Yeah, we've looked at, I know that's where we started actually, totally. We've done a whole feasibility study looking at that, and for various reasons it's not appropriate, and the village hall have quite specific needs and services that they want to provide. I mean, only yesterday George Barker was grilling me on accessibility, and that's why we didn't look at the Royal Arcade upper floors, for instance, for the community centre. That was my first thought, but it just wouldn't meet accessibility requirements. You couldn't provide a big enough hall type of space, you know. It's quite specific.
Thank you.
I'm not his boss, I'm afraid. I'm afraid this isn't going to work, sorry. So I'll just go without the presentation and just talk a few words. My title is Head of Regulatory Services, which is a rather unfortunate title to have, but it covers environmental health and trading standards and environmental protection houses and standards and port health services. But it also includes areas around envirocrime enforcement, and that would include things like fly tipping. As Mog's just said, unfortunately my colleague from Environment Services couldn't be here today. Environment deal with the cleansing, so they collect the waste, they collect fly tips and they dispose of it. So if I get any questions on that, I might struggle a little bit. That is also the department that deals with provision of public toilets. So lucky him that he couldn't be here today. So what is fly tipping? Well, it's a, it may sound rather obvious, but it's the illegal deposit of waste on land. Actually, that's a little bit more nuanced than that, because to deposit rubbish anywhere, it has to be on a licensed site. And there aren't many licensed sites, but if you want to deposit rubbish anywhere, household or commercial waste, it has to be a licensed site. So if it's not on a licensed site, then actually it's illegal. It's unlawful to put rubbish anywhere on a licensed site. So in effect, that is what fly tipping is. And I don't have to tell you, you know, you heard in the introduction here, that it impacts on the local landscape quite considerably. You know, it's unsightly, it can make people's quality of life awful if you live in an area that gets an awful lot of fly tips. And it's costly to local taxpayers, because the council has to pay for the fly tips to be removed, and obviously that's local council tax money. It is actually slightly different from littering. It's not the same thing, although there's a big grey area. At what point does littering become a fly tip? But in essence, fly tipping is when you produce waste within a building or on a piece of land and take it for unlawful disposal. That's a fly tip, as opposed to littering where you just drop something on the street. It's enforced by councils, also by the Environment Agency and the police, but generally the Environment Agency and the police go after the big criminal gangs. So that's what you've probably seen on television previously, where you see these big tipper trucks going into a country lane somewhere and tipping. These are criminal gangs that purport to be legitimate licensed traders, and they're not. Just on that bit, if you employ someone to take waste away, there is actually a duty upon yourself, whether you're a shop owner, commercial or resident, to make sure that that person is a licensed waste carrier. Now, it's understandable most people wouldn't realise that, but in fact there is a duty, there's a legal duty on anyone who employs someone to take waste away to make sure that they have got a licence to do so. So it's worth just being mindful of that and asking that question. So for the year 2020-21, there were 1.1 million fly tips incidents across the whole of England. So that's over 1 million fly tips. That's 16% more than the previous year. That has to be a little bit caveated because, of course, it was a COVID year. Most of the tips were closed for about four months. And of course, people were at home more. They may have been doing more DIY at home. So, but that being said, it is generally on the increase. It's going up year on year. About 2/3 of the fly tips are household waste, so it's not commercial, about 2/3 household. and about 2/5 of that is just dumped on a highway or pavement. And the number of fixed penalty notices was about 57,000 for the whole of that year. Most fly tips actually are small fly tips. They're a car boot load or a small van load. So the pictures you see of these very large fly tips, actually that's unusual. The vast majority, about 80%, are just small fly tips of the kind that we get in BCP area. So in the BCP area, for 2020, we had 2,800 fly tips across BCP Council area, and that was a 64% increase over the previous year. But again, I have to caveat that it was a COVID year, so I mean, it doesn't justify people fly tipping, but I'm not surprised it went up because our tips were shut for about 4 months. In Bournemouth alone, I haven't got the figures for the whole area, I'm afraid, but in Bournemouth alone, it cost £300,000 to clear up the fly tips. So that's just Bournemouth. And that doesn't include the fly tips on private land. So, you know, private land, it's up to the landowner to remove those fly tips. So it's likely to be a much, much bigger cost than the £300,000 in terms of the cost on the whole community. So what's the council doing about it? Well, on the formation of BCP Council in 2019, there was no dedicated resource at all to deal with fly tipping, none whatsoever. So we went to our cabinet that year and we explained that, and the cabinet agreed to the employment of an organisation called Waste Investigation Support and Enforcement, or WISE. So that in short it's called WISE. It's a pilot for 12 months, started in September. The premise of it is that it had to be cost neutral because the council is strapped for cash. So that was the premise at that time. We're re-looking at that, and I'll come on to that in a minute. What cost neutral means is that when WISE serves an FPN, they do it on our behalf, so it's still the council that serves a fixed penalty notice or a fine. The company gets the fine, and that's what pays for their staff costs. So that's not without controversy, because it's arguable that they're being incentivised to serve fixed penalty notices. We have oversight of all of them. Every single FPN that's served, we have oversight of that. So we will refuse to serve some where we think they've perhaps been a little bit too vociferous. And in fact, we've done that on a number of occasions. We've said, no, we're not prepared to serve that because we don't think it's justified. But like I say, there's been, you know, it can be quite controversial. But the benefit is it doesn't cost the council taxpayer anything. It's cost neutral, and they are catching people. You know, they're catching people that are doing fly tips, and they're serving fixed penalty notices. There's a mix of proactive and reactive. So they're doing proactive patrolling around areas. That includes high streets, it includes businesses. Businesses have something called a duty of care. They have to employ a proper waste disposal contractor. They can't use domestic bins. They're not supposed to use someone else's bin. So when they find businesses that haven't got that, they give them 7 days notice, and then they'll serve a fixed penalty notice. They're also patrolling alleyways. This is private alleyways and council run alleyways, as well as car parks, and also incidents are just reported online. So we will respond to incidents. Very difficult to investigate small fly tips. If there's CCTV around, we'll look at that. If there's evidence within there, sometimes you find evidence of people's names and addresses, they'll look at that. Sometimes there are witnesses, people saw it happening, they've got the car details where it happened, we'll work on that. But if you just find a mattress in a street, there's no CCTV, no witnesses, actually it's virtually impossible to investigate. So we can't deal with those ones. We'll judge each one on its merits as to whether we can do an investigation or not. So in terms of fixed penalty notices, the fine is £200 if it's paid within 14 days, or it's £400 paid within 28 days. If it goes to prosecution, so if they don't pay the fine, and we will take it to prosecution, they can be fined up to £20,000 and sent to prison. And the police are able to seize vehicles that have been used for fly tipping. Since September, since the start of the scheme, we've served 369 fixed penalty notices, and 65% of those has been paid. So the remainder that haven't been paid, we're going to instigate legal proceedings. In the Boscombe area, Boscombe West, we've served 19 fines, and in Boscombe East, Folkestone, we've served 23 fines. So that's roughly in proportion with the population or you know, population-wise, it's roughly in proportion of the total fines that we've served. Having said that, we're looking at areas where there might be slightly elevated areas of fly tips, and Boscombe is one of those. There are a few others as well, but Boscombe is one of those. We haven't got exact statistics yet, that's why I was hoping my colleague from Environment would be able to provide that information. But what we are going to do when we review it, which we're just about to, is to perhaps look at the areas where there's elevated areas, or elevated numbers of fly tips, and we're going to put a bit more resource into those areas to reflect the increased numbers of fly tips. One of the problems we do have, incidentally, again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to put the presentation up, but I've got pictures here of a charity shop with a load of stuff dumped outside. Charity shops are pleading with us to deal with these things. People go to parent charity shops, they put a load of stuff outside in the mistaken belief or knowingly that they can't sell the stuff, or they might believe they can sell the stuff but the charities can't. The charities don't want that. The picture here is a massive fly tip outside a charity shop. If it's on public land on the pavement, we'll clear it, but sometimes it's within the curtilage of the charity shop, and they have to then pay for it. So this is a charity that's having to pay for the removal of a large fly tip. So it is an increasing problem, unfortunately. As I said, we are about to start a review, and I would be interested to hear some views. We're going to go out to consultation anyway, so one way or the other it will come around. But I'd be interested to hear views about what we're doing wrong, what we could do better, how we could improve things. But the review is going to look at the principle of self-funding. You know, are there adverse incentives being given to the company to serve fixed penalty notices? We'll look at the expansion of what they do, because at the moment they only deal with fly tipping, but they could be dealing with littering, they could be looking at dog fouling, fly posting, graffiti. So we're going to look at whether we should be expanding their services. We're going to be looking at the balance between education, advice and enforcement. So how much education should there be as opposed to just enforcement? But that will cost the council money. You know, and money is very tight at the moment. If we want the company to go in and not serve a fixed penalty notice but give advice, then we've got to pay for that, because otherwise the company can't make money out of that. But also we'll be looking at expanding other bits of service provision as well. So this is more the carrot and stick approach. So the stick approach might be enforcement, but actually what about providing free bulky waste services? What about providing other receptacles apart from the main waste sites? Now, councils used to do this a lot, and then following austerity, they cut back on all of these things. So those are things we're going to be looking at. But of course, that costs the council a lot of money. So, you know, I'm going to have to make a very good case for that sort of thing to be put in place. And of course, we're competing against an awful lot of other council services that say they need money for things as well. But what I would be saying, of course, is it might actually pay for itself. Because if we provide better facilities for people to dispose of their waste, actually make it less fly tips. So therefore that will cost us less. So that's part of the review. I'm going to leave it there, Mark, if that's all right. I'm sorry I couldn't put the presentation up, but I'm happy to take any questions if we've got time.
I'm sure.
Did you
take a pic, yeah?
Can I ask, so the company gets the fine,
Yeah.
they've been operating since September.
Yeah.
Based on a fine of £200, their income is averaging out about 15,000 a month from that. But does the council still have to clear up the fly tipping that's occurred?
Yes,
So you've
we do.
still got a £300,000
Yeah.
bill
Yeah.
for clearing up the fly
Yeah.
tipping. Have you considered looking at other alternatives where you yourself put in, for example, temporary CCTV on known fly tipping hotspots, or you know, to stop it before it actually happens in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that is part of the review. I mean, I just mentioned a couple of things, but the review will look at all of that. This was brought in, I have to say, in rather a hurry, because there was no provision at all. But with the proviso, it's a 1-year contract, but we can pull out any time we want, in fact. That's the nature of the contract. But the proviso was we review it after 7 months, hence it's being reviewed in April. And we'll look at all of these things. CCTV, of course, costs us, but it could have benefits because it deters people from doing it. But the trouble is they then put it somewhere else. But actually it helps us catch them. In fact, the company-wise don't get all the money. They give a proportion to us to pay for legal costs. So the council doesn't make money out of it, but what that does do is it helps to pay for the prosecutions, because like I said, there's a 65% payment rate, so we're going to have to prosecute the other people, and that does cost us money. We may get cost back, but we may not. It depends if people are able to pay them, so it's not, they don't get the whole of that money. But yes, absolutely, we need to consider.
Can I ask, is that a lot of people might know or not know that there's been a lot of issues with Churchill Gardens area?
Yeah.
Is that the company you're talking about that's now patrolling Churchill Gardens?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and in fact,
And is it improving?
yeah. Well, I haven't got pictures of that. We believe it's improving. Again, I'm sorry about that.
Anecdotally, I think it has improved, but it's still up and down.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some examples here. I mean, I've got the pictures of an alleyway here where, in fact, you know, it was a real problem with commercial bins, and we went in there, and it's now much better. Patrolling in itself doesn't have much benefit, I don't think. You've got to investigate the fly tips, and you've got to catch the people that do it. Because unless we've got someone there pretty much most of the time, you know, just doing an occasional patrol isn't a great deterrent. Just coming back to what I said about alleyways, these are where often you've got a row of shops, there's an alleyway, and you've got the commercial bins in the alleyway.
Like behind Boscombe.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
So what happens is a lot of businesses don't bother with their commercial waste. They don't bother to get one, even though they're legally obliged. What they do is they chuck all their rubbish in some other business's bins, and those bins then overflow. Because that business has arranged its waste collection based on what it knows it produces in terms of waste. So it's not fair on that business that they get other businesses' waste, but also it means you get hugely overflowing bins, and you get an alleyway that's just full of rubbish. So those businesses complain to us, the legitimate businesses, saying, well, we know other businesses are putting their rubbish in our containers, can you do something? So that's what Wise do. They go to the business that hasn't got a waste contract, and they say, show us your waste contract, you've got 7 days to prove you've got it. If they don't have it, they get a fixed penalty notice. And they're told, we're coming back, so you better get a waste contract. But coming back to what I was saying earlier about the balance between information and enforcement, that might be one of the areas where we might say, well, rather than serve a fixed penalty notice, go into the business and say you've got 7 days to get a contract in place, or you will get a fine. So, you know, that might be one of those areas. But at the moment, Wise would just go in and serve a fine if they haven't got a waste contract in place. So that's what I mean about the balance between education and enforcement.
Yeah, I think myself and Councillor Farquhar spent quite a bit of time, I think it's fair to say, in recent months dealing with one kind of fly tipping or another. I think my frustration, not particularly mentioning charity shops here, but private land in general, the amount of time it takes to actually remove the waste. I mean, we had one pile in our ward not that long ago.
Is this community meeting about Boscombe?
Yes.
Is it? All right.
Bit late, mate.
Yeah, there was one particular pile which had doubled, trebled and quadrupled in size over about a month. And of course, residents were rightly contacted us and saying, you know, when's this going to be removed? It's health, that, this, that and the other. And we had numerous exchanges with different teams at the council. So we really need to get rid of this. We get a record amount, a number of complaints now. It's clearly a health hazard. What can we do to actually speed up that process? Will anything actually be done to speed up the removal of fly tipping on private property particularly?
I think
probably in general as well.
I think there is. One of the challenges when it's on private land, there's the offence of fly tipping in the first place, so whoever did it, we want to investigate that. But then there's the landowner on whose land the fly tip takes place. They've got the responsibility to remove it. If they don't, we can go through a legal process, and that's what takes the time. So you've got to go through, you've got to serve an enforcement notice on them. You've got to give them at least 28 days, and when they haven't done it, then have to go through a legal process. And if they don't remove it immediately, it can then take quite a few months, because we've got to go to court and then go and do it in default. One of the things that would speed it up, but this will cost the council money, is to offer those landowners a reduced price, or even free. I think free probably would be too generous, but certainly a reduced price, and say, we're going to go down an enforcement route with you, and you're going to pay the full cost. Or we'll do it for much cheaper if you do it within 7 days. or whatever. So those are the kind of options I think we need to look at.
I think my concern is obviously the 28 days, that pile is there, it's increasing in size,
Yeah,
more
yeah.
people complaining about it.
Yeah.
I mean, we had one very recently, I mean, you know, the size of it was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And people are understandably complaining, and, you know, week by week it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So 28 days, I understand that from a legal perspective, that's a long time for a pile of fly tipping, which is increasing in size on a daily basis to be left.
Well, why don't they do it like they do it in Kingston upon Hull? Every so many weeks the council come and they have a clearance day, and everybody puts everything out and it's cleared on one day, and everybody brings it out. Or they have skips in the car park, but then the problem is fly tipping. The council have created it themselves because you're restricting people taking stuff to the tips. But if you've got a little van like a Citroen Berlingo van, you can't go to Christchurch tip. You have to go to Longham. You can only go there 6 times a year, and you have to get your card punched. So how much fuel does it take to drive from here to Longham and back? A lot of people can't be bothered. So the council have created themselves. If you put skips, a big skip in Corkwood Road car park, and in certain car parks, and then every so often it's emptied, then everybody's paying enough council tax anyway. You've got to put something back into the community. You can't keep taking out. You've got to put back.
Actually, we
Then
weren't
you've got rid of all the
yeah.
recycle bin. I mean, there was electrical recycle bin in Hawkwood Road car park, and that's gone. The charity shop bin is too small. It's overflowing with clothing, and then people want to go and help themselves to some clothing, fair enough, and then the bags are strewn everywhere, and it gets wet, and then it gets thrown away. So really, you need more bins. It's not hard work, is it?
Yeah. Actually, you weren't here for the bit when I did actually
I'm
say
sorry
that. Yeah. That we're reviewing the whole thing, and one of the things we're looking at is exactly that, because many years ago, councils across the country used to do this
Yeah,
kind
you
of
ring
thing.
up, they come and collect your
And
rubbish.
then, yeah, that's right. And then with austerity, they've removed a lot of this. So, you know, there's a good chance that's linked to fly tipping. So that's one of the things we need to look at.
Charges at the tip as well.
Yeah, in fact.
What about the charges? Have you noticed an increase in fly tipping since the charge? I think the last time I went down, I think it was £10 for a car tyre, to take a car tyre in. I mean, is it getting to a stage where it could be counterproductive? You'd save more by letting people take them in there for free.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if there was an increase in fly tipping. I can't say that's cause and effect. I can't say that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Yeah.
Well, the tyre fitting places will get rid of the tyres. I think it's a minimum of £2 per tyre. The tyre fitting place, they'll take them away for £2.
Yeah.
But you have to pay £2 to get rid of them.
Can I just say that I think, I mean, Peter's given us a quick overview, and you have sent me a copy of your presentation, haven't you? So fingers crossed, I'll hopefully put that on our Facebook page. I think there's enough meat in this discussion to return to it again with you know, more focus. We're trying to cover a lot of bases tonight, but I think the fact that you're reviewing the service, and that will go to public consultation, will it? Or is that an internal?
I presume so. Part of the thing, well, I would hope so.
Yeah.
Part of the before we start the review, we have to say what are the boundaries of the review and what are we going to do. So I run the enforcement side.
Yeah.
Like I said, environment services, and it's a shame my colleague couldn't be here. Deal with the collection, the provision of waste collection, the charging of the fees, all that side of things. So they would have to be doing that side of the review. So.
Well, again, you know, you can feed ideas in through the forum, or indeed there's 3 local councillors here tonight. So.
How long is that review process taking? And has that got a sort of
there's going to be a
date
review of just the contract in April. But then that will should lead on to a much wider review about what we do overall. You know, like I said, sort of carrot and stick approach. So the enforcement on the one hand, but the incentivise people to do the right thing. So I don't have details on that yet. That's something that we need to.
Some of the fly tipping that's been happening around these kind of communal bins where they're kind of because they're a place where everyone is sticking rubbish, and other people nearby streets who aren't supposed to be using them start using them, and then mattresses appear and all sorts of other.
Well, when you see the slides, you'll see I've got a picture of just that. I was going to say actually that is fly tipping, even though there are communal bins there. If you dump rubbish next to it, it's fly tipping. But then come back to the argument: should we perhaps have a facility for that? Should we encourage people to go to those communal bins and have bigger receptacles, so that it doesn't overflow?
Have them empty more often.
Councillor
Can
Kennedy,
I just say that I think I'm not sure if it's your team, Peter, or on a slightly different team, waste management, do a fabulous job collecting all this stuff. all daily, isn't it, around the
Yeah,
bus.
yeah.
So they're probably in Boscombe, I don't know, 3 or 4 times a week, I think, because of the way it moves. So it's absolutely brilliant, but costs an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
And what worries me is that we've almost got into a sort of culture where it's almost okay to flight it. I mean, it really isn't, but that's how it seems, because it's expensive at the tip, because you can only do it, you know, all these things, and people's incomes are being stretched. You know, it's very, very difficult. I understand that. What worries me very much is, although it's a fabulous idea, and we did used to have skips every now and again in places, or a day where you collect, people will still, you know, flight it, and then we end up with both costs. And so you know, it's a really difficult balance, and somehow we've got to change that culture and say, look, we're going to help you by doing this, but other people have got to behave responsibly and not, you know, for landlords who are clearing out a flat, it's easy, isn't it, just to walk over the road and put a wardrobe under in. And I think Harry just said there is a review of community bins going on as well, isn't there, across the borough, just to see what works and what doesn't and what we can do.
I mean, some people leave stuff out for free and they put a sticker on it free, please help yourself, and then bad tea time is gone if it's something like this.
A quick comment from Councillor Jones?
Just really to touch, to agree with what Councillor Kelly just said about the culture of fly tipping. I mean, there's one particular on a fly tipping I was referring to earlier on. Managed to get it cleared in the end, and I noticed driving down this particular road tonight, it's starting to build up there again. So it's almost like it becomes known as an acceptable place to fly tip, and that's a really difficult thing to deal with. But somehow or other, we need to do it more effectively than we're doing it now.
Those are the places we need CCTV. Where that happens, and we're looking at remote mobile CCTV, which I think is probably better, because if we put it there permanently, people just find another place. So we want CCTV that can be moved from place to place.
So I think, again, I think we can return to this. I'm sorry, if we don't, no, thank you, Peter. If we don't move on, our final guest will get a chance to speak.
You say people are responsible if they employ somebody to take their fly tipping away. So would that company have like a certificate to say? Yeah.
They've got a licence number by the Environment Agency.
Yeah, and it would have an expiry date and everything on it. Yeah. Okay, and maybe a photo that, you know, it wasn't just somebody else who borrowed it from somebody else.
I don't know about a photo actually. I don't think it does. No, it just gives the registration number and the name of the company.
Commercial waste carrier, isn't it? There's one out Magna Road, the commercial way, the way you in on the way bridge and the way on the well.
Okay, I'd like to just thank Peter Hagan, if everyone could thank him for the informative presentation, and like Morag said, we will visit this again, because obviously it's something that comes up and it does cause a lot of social problems. And so I'd like to welcome Richard Smith to come and talk about the Village Hall Community Centre for Boscombe.
Thank you. So if I've not met you before, Richard Smith, I'm going to talk about the Village Hall. I haven't got a presentation, so you'll just have to be bored by me. I think when I was here 3 months ago, I was asking for volunteers. We've progressed a little bit from there. We've almost defined ourselves. We've started the process of registering ourselves with the Charities Commission. We now have committee members, and I'm looking at my fellow committee members. So things are happening. What are we trying to create is a good question. And I don't think we've quite answered that. So any ideas we're always welcome. My thoughts, and I don't want to sway anybody else in the room, because we like I say, the committee's still discussing this, is a community centre that's obviously open and accessible for everybody in our community. And I use that in the broadest sense. And we know we have a very diverse community in Boscombe. So how do we do that? We are thinking along the lines of something based around health and well-being. So is that about healthy food? Is that about healthy body, healthy mind? Who knows? I like it because it gives everybody something to get involved in. So you imagine, we built this centre. I say we. I think Martha does the hard bit and lays the bricks and builds it for me. Yes, it will have all of those things that we've spoken about, if we get the money. So things like green roofs and a roof space, I think it's a necessity. Why do I say that? I think if there's going to be housing development close by and we live in an urban area, showcasing what you can grow in small areas in niche plant pots has got to be quite exciting. It's got to be quite informative. So yes, there'll be something utilised on the roof and green spaces and growing things. And I think from there, with our rooms that we're going to have to hire for people to hire, so they can come along, and I have to be careful how I say this, because I can't say ladies that do Zumba, because most Zumba classes that go to now have men in there. So you imagine people will be coming along and doing their activities. People will, you think, I'm thinking about my mum. She goes to a lovely knitting club. Again, I've got to be very careful. She'll tell me off because she does lots of gossip in there. But she likes those spaces because they're welcoming, they're open, and she can just pop in. So this, in the back of my mind, is what I'm trying to create. I say I'm looking at the rest of the committee, and it's a we. I'm just the daft one that has to stand at the front and tell people about it. So we're trying to create this space where people can either come in and hire a room. I like hire because it gives me money that I can pay for my gas and electricity, but also provide services for people in Boscombe. So I like the hire bit. I like big parties because then I can charge you a little bit more for a big party and provide more services back to Boscombe. So the best way of thinking about how a charity works is we provide something, people pay for it, and then I provide services to other people at Boscombe who can't necessarily afford it. Now we're going to build a kitchen. We're going to have I won't say a cafe, but there's going to be a kitchen and a cafe space. I don't want to use the words cafe because Boscombe's got a bit of a cafe culture come in, and I don't want to compete with that. But go back to where I said earlier on, there are people within Boscombe that live within a beautiful village community that probably don't use the cafe culture of Boscombe. Well, why can't they use mine? Yeah. So that's the sort of thing that I'm looking for. Now they won't be able to pay huge wages and fund everything, so I'll be looking to get money out of other people in other ways. That's the exciting part. So, you want to know where we are and how far we're doing. I think it's already been intimated that another year and things should start to happen. During that year, I've got to register the charity, which we're getting there. So we'll have the charity registered. We'll have plans about what we're going to do. Those plans will be brought back to everybody to say, no, I don't like that, or I want some more of that, or I want a bit of that. So we should have that May, June time for everybody to come and have a chat in the arcade room, because I'm sure Martha will let me steal the big desk and everything. So we'll put some ideas forward, everybody will be involved, tell us what they think, and then we'll go away and make it happen. So you think about a year from now, Christmas is not far away, is it? We'll have to find some money, because Martha will help me build it, but we've got to quite literally get the pots and pans and pay for the staff, the gas, the electricity, blah, blah, blah. So we'll find some money. That's generally not a problem. We'll think about what services we're going to provide, working with NHS, local authority, people like that, community, to provide services. So, like I say, no fancy pictures, because that's very fluid and will change. When you think of the building that you want to create for your community, our community, the bigger, the bolder, the better ideas. I love it, because if you give me as many ideas as possible, I can try and build them in. I can try funding them. I might not have all the money from day one. It might take me 2 or 3 years to get everything built. But the idea is that it keeps improving and keeps changing and developing. We know that 5 years ago, the services that Boscombe needed were probably going to be different to what it needs in 2 years' time. So the idea is to produce this space that can grow and evolve and change. So easy. We'll have it done. A couple of years. Yeah? I think that's when we're talking about having it opened, isn't it?
We've got to have start of the building by 2026. That's our last, that's the latest it can
Martha,
be.
you'll be laying
So-
bricks well before
Yeah,
then.
I hope so. We'll be applying for planning permission. We want to get planning permission this year. So.
Yeah. Part of the, I suppose we have to be around to say that we are a viable entity, that we can do this, that we've got experience. So believe you me, as much as I look disorganised with my PowerPoint, we have done this before, so you're in safe hands. Is the only thing I'm going to say. So,
Yes, loving the enthusiasm, loving the fact that you're moving along and all the pieces are falling into place. That's absolutely great. Really picked up on the fact that roof space, roof garden, want to move away from flower pots. I want to capture what we heard from Councillor Broadhead earlier, which is biodiversity. You know, a roof garden, a roof park, you know, water capture, grey water recycling, you know, solar power for, you know, polytunnels or whatever. So just a little bit of a hiccup for that, and I like the big bold ideas. So when you're fighting for that, yeah, let's have that in there, and let's make sure that the planning department and the planning application, which needs to be going in, includes that in there.
Yeah.
So not just a turf roof, you know, one of these.
plant a few daffodils and that's
working
it.
space, an activity space, which actually increases the biodiversity and increases the green space that we have for our community.
And I think there's so much that you can do with an open space on the top of a building that's got some growing space. It's got some maybe, I'm going to move away from my example of ladies working and doing WI. There's a great group called Men in Sheds, and I'm just thinking, you know, they have their space up there, they've got the vista across everything. You know, these are the sort of things, I call them low-level mental health activities, are really good for people, whether you're newly living by yourself as an older man, all the way through to young chaps trying to find their way through in life. Great spaces to come. So it's not just about the biodiversity, but it's also about the social diversity. What can we provide there that enables the whole community to come together? But yeah.
Are you considering any facilities for children? I asked that because the former place we had an art workshop, a kiln, potter's wheels, and children made stuff there and stuff like that.
I'm going to be very careful and say that the exact nuance of what's going to be delivered there is still very fluid. But I think that there will be opportunities for children's services to happen from there. Now, it wouldn't necessarily be as formal as a creche and, you know, nurseries, but I think spaces that young mums and dads, I'm no longer a young dad, but certainly those spaces that they can come along, utilise, and like you say, either build, create, do something. So yes, definitely something along those sort of lines in those community rooms. And that could be delivered by a member of the community to their particular group, or it could be provided by the community centre out of our surplus money that we've made and giving something back.
I see the location of the village hall has moved again. Because the last sort of discussion that I heard was it was going to be adjacent to the Pocket Park. It looks like it's going to be the other side of Hopwood Road, which means it's within a built environment and we're losing the park surround.
So I have to be careful how I say this. In the ideal world, we would have this 8-storey building providing 1 million services free at the point of use for everybody within the community. Martha has to make the bucks balance, yeah? So I'm very pragmatic. I say to Martha, it has to be as big as possible, it has to have this, this and this. Martha's like, I work within those constraints. I'm not saying it's ideal where it is, but what I'm saying is, wow, we're going to go to a community centre that's close to the high street, that has the potential for all of these things that we want. So whoever has exactly what they want, come and see me later and tell me how you do it. But actually making something amazing out of that space, I think we've got a great opportunity.
But don't lose sight of the idea of having disabled parking. Because the far end of Hopwood car park is too far.
I am going to park that over there. Parking falls with somebody else. I cannot do anything about parking. Yeah, I cannot make it appear. I cannot insist that there's some there. I could turn around to Martha and say, look, community centre, we need disabled access, we need these sort of things.
Well, it'd be a modern building, you know, like do that to comply with so many regulations, but be absolutely accessibility. We have to have all of that, you know, loading bays.
Will there be any disabled parking bays?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I thought we'd have to do that under the regulations.
There has to be a certain amount, don't there? And it's never going to be enough, you know. But there'll be, going back to the earlier conversation, there'll be the requirements met. So.
You said you needed the money. Well, I mean, it's £21 million.
I'm afraid that's not all of mine. As much as Martha would love.
They could give you £1 million, surely.
Yeah, we give them a bit more than that.
I'm not going to say how much the building is because Martha just conveniently never tells me. So I think the best way to look at it is that there's an awful lot of money being spent to create a space for the community to do things with. Now, yes, we could turn around and say, give us money to run it, give us money for this, give us money for that. My problem is then that we get a bit complacent as a community. We just have to sit back, put our feet up. We have no sense of ownership. I think, and this is a controversial thing, if somebody's provided us with this amazing shell, we as a community can come together and fund it and resource it and do those things to make it happen. Because after all, we want this to happen. So do we naturally take a back seat and just let somebody else do it for us? I don't think we do. I think we're very grateful for a building that meets all of the rules and regulations. And we as a community have to turn around and say, right, that's what I want. I'm going to go and find somebody to fundraise for me. I'm going to find somebody to fund it for me. There are a lot of institutions out there. If I start writing begging letters, they'll help me. Yeah. So I'm not worried about getting the money. Of course I'd love Martha to give me more. But it's going back to what I said earlier on. Martha has to fund lots and lots of things out of that. A couple of quid, I think she's got stuffed down the back of the sofa. So I'm very grateful as a community that we're going the centre, we're going to get some bobs thrown in there. I think it's also a great opportunity for us to do things and mark and provide something back to Boscombe.
You could have, you know, like Nick Knowles, is it him who goes around, you know?
We could have whoever we want. I'm old enough to remember Challenge Annika and the helicopter coming in and hurling around. There is no reason we cannot. The world is our oyster when it comes to getting people involved and getting people to help us fundraise. And that's all the way from people writing begging letters to grant-making institutions that pay for things, all the way through to shaking a bucket on the high street saying, actually, if you put £5 in there, that will pay for a...
Yeah, but if you've got people to do physical things, you know, you can't keep asking people for money left, right and centre.
No.
Especially in today's age. You could say, well, you're a plasterer, I need this wall plastered. Are you a brickie? I need this done.
I don't agree with doing it like that. I think... I'm not a brickie or a plasterer. I do... I probably don't have a trade when it comes to working. But I think it's very unfair to go to a brickie and say, build me this wall, and I'm not going to pay for it.
They volunteer. You maybe have a month. You know.
I think the challenge there is getting people to volunteer. My dad always said, when you go around to a builder's house, it's always the one that's not finished. So then asking them to come round and do building in his spare time or her spare time in our community centre. I would much rather write to Joseph Roundtree's foundation and say, give me £20,000 to fund a community cafe that's going to give things back to a community that's in desperate need of providing healthy living, training facilities, cooking, education back to the community. I'd much rather write that than go to a builder and say, look mate, in your spare time,
Well, that's fine if you give you the 20,000.
we'll have to see how good we are with begging
Can I
letters.
just add a bit there, Richard? That I think it's a lovely idea, in theory, but in practice, then if anything goes wrong with the building that the volunteer's done, you've got no comeback. Whereas if you employ a builder and the plaster falls off the wall,
Heaven forbid.
you've got comeback
Yeah.
then.
But there will be lots of volunteering opportunities
Oh,
to
yes.
help people, get into jobs and work. It's a really important part of running the place, isn't it?
I think we'll be looking at some paid staff to support a whole raft of volunteers, whether it's a volunteer receptionist, whether it's a volunteer cleaner, there'll be all sorts of things that I'll be looking for people to help me with. So yeah, don't worry, I'll specifically find you a job. Are you a brickie?
Would it be brilliant though if you could incorporate some sort of apprenticeship system into the construction, early employment opportunities for young people?
Yeah, I think what this lady is trying to tie into that actually as well. The idea of training or mentorship possibly for the build.
I think,
and using that service.
I think
tying her idea in with that sounds
within-
like a community circular initiative.
Brilliant.
I mean, there's so much emphasis on everyone going to university and getting a media degree. I'm sorry if anyone's got one here. But, why not encourage young people back into apprenticeships, and give them something that they can see in their local area, their community building, and it'll be a good place for them.
It's a good idea to build on. It's a good concept to sort of grow into.
I suspect as part of the planning application and the building and the people who tender for that, they will have specific, I'm not going to quote what they have to do, but I suspect they'll have to have requirements about providing apprenticeships and things like that.
They don't at the moment, and it's
Don't
really
they?
good, I think it's a really good point.
Well, Martha, can we write that into the planning
Well, we
application?
worked in, 20 years ago, it's something in London that we did include within, a certain proportion of the people working on the building site needed to come from existing apprenticeship schemes. And there are those schemes going on, so there's real potential.
Perhaps that needs to be fed back to Councillor Broadhead as well with this planning consultation. There's no reason why that couldn't be incorporated within planning.
I think it goes one stage further in the planning application that Martha puts in. We say that's what we want from the builders who come and build our homes, our buildings, our community centre. That's what they have to deliver for us. Obviously, I can't influence Martha at all in what she's going to put in there, but you guys can.
I'm sure we'll be returning to the village hall.
Oh yes, I'll be
on
back
many
in 3 months.
future occasions. Thank you.